instruction with the vowel teams, specifically because that was driven by the data from the fall. And then the second half was that I realized very quickly when I began working with Frank that he had a lot of behavioral characteristics of a struggling reader. He had a lot of learned helplessness you were talking about. He didn't have a lot of strategies for word attack skills, and he just looked to me constantly to provide him with clues and to provide him with next steps for his reading. And that was something that I really wanted to dissuade him from using, that like, I'm not a strategy. And I think that some of that stems from a lack of individualized attention in the classroom. I think in terms of like school context, whenever I said that Frank was a student I was working with, anyone I told that was like, ooh, like that must be kind of tough. Like, how's that going? So I think he kind of has a reputation as a difficult kid, and his parents, I know, also have a reputation thinking about the whole child.
I wonder how he's like internalized that to some extent.
Right. So I think that like people have kind of pushed him aside. Teachers have kind of pushed him aside as like a difficult kid. What am I going to do about it? So just thinking about like equity versus equality, and Terry and Klinger's work on moving away from the deficit model and moving more towards an asset-based model for struggling readers. He does not have any sort of diagnosis, but he exhibits a lot of behaviors of struggling readers. So anyways, that's all to say that the second portion of our lesson, we would always begin with the phonics stuff, and then we move into just reading a story together. And between the phonics instruction and reading the story, we would go over a specific word attack strategy. So we had a bookmark that we used that he could stick in the book when we finished reading for the day, similar to what you were saying, that just had different attack strategies that he could use. So things like saying the first sound of a word in order to get yourself started, or chunking it. He's really good at chunking. That's a strategy that he uses a lot, especially since we explicitly named it as a strategy. Looking for chunks that he knows in the word.
Here's a short clip of Frank using his chunking strategy.
Hard. You didn't even need my help. How did you figure out it was hard?
Because it has the ER.
Have you learned about bossy R?
No. I don't know.
Good strategy. You chunked that word to find the part that you knew. You knew the ER.
We started talking about how you can look at a picture, especially because he likes informational text a lot. So the pictures will often, if it's a difficult word because it's domain specific, he can often use the pictures to figure it out because he has background knowledge about animals in particular that he likes. So that works well for him. So that phonics, and then we did word attack strategies. That was kind of the structure of our lesson every time, and it worked really well for us. But one thing that changed was that at the beginning of the lesson, at the beginning of the semester, I was thinking a lot about what Allington was saying about high success reading, and that was kind of the framework that I entered this with, wanting to make sure that he was having a lot of success reading because I wasn't sure that he was getting that in the classroom. But I also wanted to think a lot about what Harvey and Ward and the Striving to Thriving were saying about how interest can really drive reading development. And because he had such specific interests, I wanted to incorporate that into instruction. But his specific interests were all animals, basically. And informational texts are hard to find at a level G. So I kind of scoured National Library and our library and was finding things that were maybe like H's and I's and J's, but I knew that it was something he really wanted to learn about, so I brought them in to use. And it turned out that these difficult texts were super motivating for him because it was information that he wanted to know. So it's funny that like our readers reacted so differently to that. Like yours really succeeded in the high success domain, whereas like Frank flourished when he was challenged. So I used a lot of that interest-based stuff to just kind of motivate him to read, because I think he's been told for a long time that he's a struggling reader. So it was really important to me that he saw himself as someone who could read these really informational texts about things that he was interested in, thinking too about short, like you said, learning about language, learning through language, all of that stuff kind of came into play when I think about using interest-based text with him. So that was just one way that my instruction changed after I kind of realized that challenging him was an appropriate thing for his instruction was successful. I leaned towards finding texts that he was interested in and worrying less about what level they were.
Yeah, and I think that the two can go together, like high success reading and that like challenge and an interest text. Like I think that the high success reading can help to build that confidence that like a reader may not have experienced before, and then once you have that confidence, that can kind of go into being ready to take on challenges and like take on texts that that seem hard or that seem tricky to you. So I feel like they really feed into each other, and I like started to notice that with Lucy as well. I would bring in text, they were still about dogs, but they were like they were higher than what she had been reading, and her excitement about those books was so real and like really motivated her to try in those texts and to want to like share them with her friends, which I think was another big piece of it.
Right, and so maybe Frank was just like a little bit, he is a very like kind of precocious, funny kid, so maybe he was just a little bit more ready for that challenge to begin with, because he was a little bit more confident. So then when he was challenged, and maybe that's like a next step for Lucy.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways that you've seen Frank progress over the past few months that you guys have been working together? What are some of the successes that you've seen?
So I've talked a little bit about this. I think this goes really hand in hand to some of the changes we made in our instruction. But first of all, his reading level skyrocketed. Like I said, he was a level G at the beginning of the year, and then also when I reassessed him at the end of the fall, after having done no intervention, just the assessments in the fall, he was still at a level G. So we didn't make any progress over that first semester we were together. But then now, since beginning intervention in January, he's now testing independent at level J.
That's awesome.
He's 95% accuracy, so it's on the border of instructional. And I honestly ran out of time. Like, he may have gotten farther than that if I had a little bit more time, and I likely will reassess him before we end our time together. But I just was so amazed that he went from a G to a J and is now like kind of performing appropriately for a second grader. He's still low, but it's closer than a G. So I was really proud to see that, and I think that comes from a combination of the two practices that I did, both the explicit phonics instruction and then the reading, the whole language stuff we did together. I also reassessed him on his mastery of vowel teams, and he scored at mastery on the informal decoding inventory that McKenna and Stahl use. So I think that this also kind of goes along with his increase in reading level, because he's mastered these vowel teams. He now reads more fluently, and this aids his comprehension. Oh, big motorcycle out there. It wasn't my cat. So he's mastered these vowel teams, leading to more fluency with his reading, and then therefore aiding comprehension, which I think has really increased his reading abilities. He also has a much better attitude about reading, in my opinion. He like jumps up when I enter the room. He enjoys reading. He'll ask me, we finish a book, and the first thing that he asks is, can we read about, he'll flip it over because it's an informational text, so it usually says what the other ones in the series are, and he'll say, well, like, can we read about bats next, or whatever it is. I can play a little clip of that now.
I think you've learned so much in second grade, and now you're reading these amazing books about all these really cool animals all by yourself. I barely helped you.
Can we look at the back?
Sure, but we do have to go back to class. Can we do a little walking?
Can we read about bats?
He's also more willing to try the strategies that we've been using. I feel like I've hopefully steered him a little bit away from this learned helplessness, because he knows that he needs to try a strategy or two before I'm going to jump in and help him. So it's like I can almost see his brain working, and he like looks at the picture, then looks back at the word, and then he like sounds out a couple of pieces of the word, and then kind of looks at me, and then he'll try one more thing, and then kind of look at me, and oftentimes like he'll get it at that point, but if he doesn't, it's some like photosynthesis or something that's super domain specific. So I've just been so pleased and so proud of all the work that he's done. How about Lucy?
So Lucy went from only knowing 12 sight words from our Fry list in the fall to now knowing over 50, which is something, that I've been super excited about. And I really am excited to, I haven't done a TLA with her yet this semester, but I'm excited to do that because I think she's going to now fly through those A and B texts that she was totally held back on by sight words. So that's one thing that I've been really excited about. And she loves her sight word ring, like, so much. Aww. I think because it's laminated, but
that's awesome.
Another success has been that, I mean, she does now know her long vowels and quite a few vowel teams and blends in isolation. I haven't seen it translate to text as much, I think, just because the texts don't have those sounds, those spelling patterns in them yet. Right. But even in the D-level text, like, she is now reading words that have the silent E on the end like that, and like knowing that when the silent E is at the end, she needs to change that vowel awesome. To a long vowel sound, which I think is really, like, and that's something that she has translated into reading connected text herself. Like, I haven't even really been pointing it out. She's just been doing it, which is pretty awesome.
That's great.
I think the biggest success, so similar to Frank, she was instructional at a B in the fall, and then again in January when I tested her when we started again, she was instructional at a B. But now, her most recent running record that I did in like the first week of April, she was reading a level D book with 100% accuracy.
That's amazing.
Which was really exciting, and I think while students, I mean, in first grade, you're expected to come in on a level D. For her to grow those like 4 levels in just a few months, I was so excited for her. Like, I'm like her biggest, every time she reads a book, I'm like, aren't you so proud? Like, I'm so excited for her.
Me too.
So I think that's been a really big area for success. And I think, again, a lot of that has come from her excitement around these high interest books and her kind of growing self-confidence and self-image as a reader.
Right.
And then I think a last kind of major success that I've noticed has been a definite increase in self-monitoring. Like, she is using that bookmark, she is using those questions to self-monitor as she reads. In our early running records that we did, there were almost no instances of self-monitoring, self-correcting. And in our most recent one, she actually self-corrected like each time she had a miscue.
Wow.
Which is huge.
And
like,
did you get it right each time?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Which is really, I think, such a big thing in terms of her continuing to like become an independent reader. She could do those things on her own, and it wasn't me stopping her and saying, I don't think something was right in that sentence. It was her stopping herself, going back, rereading.
That's so encouraging.
And like making meaning. Yeah, so it was really, that was really exciting to see. And she does love her bookmark. I actually made it for her on white paper, and like a couple of weeks in after using it, she was like, do they make these things in blue? Do they come in blue? And I was like, I can make one in blue. So now she has her light blue.
Did you order this off Amazon?
Exactly. Exactly. So definitely a success has been that she's like excited about the tools she has in her toolbox.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like, that's so funny. Going back to the being super proud of our students, like, I was listening back on the clips, and multiple times in our session together, I'm like, Frank, you just read that whole book. Aren't you proud of yourself? And he's like, yeah. Like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
They just don't understand. They don't have a concept of how far they've come.
Yes. And even, I think one thing that has been cool is that the sight word ring, though, has physically been growing. So now I'll hold it up with 50 words and be like, you just read all, like, that's a visual for how many words she's read. So I think that it's been neat to see. But
I feel like that's also a testament of, like, the work we've done to increase their confidence, that they're like, what do you mean you're proud of me? Like,
of course I did that.
Of course I read that story.
Right.
For example,
Okay. Look, it's all finished. Are you proud of yourself?
Yeah.
Me too. I'm going to take a picture.
So, what were your biggest challenges in instruction with Lucy?
I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'm sure this is something that everyone has kind of been dealing with this semester, but the time constraint of only having 30 minutes to work together really was a challenge. And like, my original instructional plan was to balance my phonics and my time reading connected text. I wanted to spend the first maybe 10 minutes doing foundational skills, 20 minutes in a text, but by the time we got together, sat down, started doing everything, the majority of our time was being spent on phonics.
Right.
And I think part of that, is reflected in that she wasn't growing a lot in the beginning. There wasn't a lot of progress being made. So I think that was one challenge, figuring out how to effectively manage that time.
Right.
And then a second challenge, I think, was being self-reflective and recognizing that what I was doing wasn't working, and having to say, like, okay, I put all this time into making this plan and it's not doing what I want it to do, so how can I change that?
Right.
And I think that was like a challenge, but a really good experience and a really good example of how not all strategies are going to work for all kids, and you have to be prepared to try different things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was something that that reflective piece was something that I kind of grappled with. I realized at the beginning we were doing just like word lists and games and things where we were practicing the vowel teams in isolation. And then when I started to like put them into words and put them into paragraphs, it became so much more effective, and kind of realizing that I had to make that switch. Another challenge for me is that, and I think you probably from other conversations we've had, I feel like you might feel the same way about this, is that I'm just concerned for him in the general classroom now that we've done all this work together, and I know about his reputation in the school. I think that's definitely like letting go and trusting his education is definitely a challenge for me, because I just worry that he's either going to be over scaffolded for or overlooked in the classroom in his like furthering education.
Yeah, and I think when like students get this label of struggling reader, there's, even if it's like not intentional, teachers will like lower expectations for that student, or not recognize the like progress that they are making because it's not grade level progress. And I think that's something that like building that confidence in our students as readers and giving them skills is something that you have to be so intentional about, because they might be overlooked. They might not be given the same opportunities and support. So what are your hopes for Frank in the next school year? What areas do you hope that he continues to grow?
Just as kind of a summary of a lot that we've talked about already, I hope just like generally hope that he continues to grow as a reader and continues to progress at grade level. But mostly I want him to be super confident in his abilities, and I want him to know that he has the tools to solve a story in a text. Like, he knows what to do now, and I just hope that he remembers that and uses those strategies in the future and doesn't, what's the opposite of progress?
Regress.
And hope that he doesn't regress, that he uses his bookmark and things like that. He uses some of the skills that we've really worked on.
I think with Lucy, my hopes are similar. I hope that she continues to develop a self-image as a reader, and like she has currently a very positive attitude towards reading, and I hope that she keeps that, because I think that's easy for readers to become discouraged, and to kind of internalize that they're not good at something, and I think that's, that would be really sad for that to happen. And I think that as like more specifically in terms of skills, as she's begun to master this skill of self-monitoring, I think in the next step for her is to develop specific strategies for solving unknown words. I think that would be the next place we would go instructionally. Now that she knows how to stop when something doesn't make sense, what do you do from there?
Is there anything from your experience working with Lucy that will transfer to your future practice?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I have from this, and it kind of goes back to the challenges I was talking about, but just really being aware that the same approach is not going to work for every student. Like, for example, phonics worked really well for your student, but it didn't work as well for Lucy. There were other skills I needed to build in before that. So just when something isn't working, being willing to try something different and having multiple strategies in my toolbox. And I think all the like theories that we've learned will inform that in the future. Just the theory shift that I had in this one experience with this one student, I think is something that I will continue to try to implement in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you?
I think kind of similarly, making sure that my strategies are exactly matching the needs of the student, and making sure that those are research-based practices and best practices. And then the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about with him is leaning towards under scaffolding with students, because we can always put in supports later, but if we just hand students scaffold after scaffold, it's not a true test of their learning. It's harder for us to inform instruction when we're giving them a lot of scaffolds. And B, I think it's a disservice to the student. I think we need to have this productive struggle. And that's that kind of sweet spot where we're supporting the student, but also allowing them to have some struggle is where they learn that zone of proximal development and Vygotsky. So I think that's my biggest takeaway is that, what is it, measure twice, cut once? I don't know if that applies here, maybe. But
It's been real.